I've outlived everyone, my wife, my friends, even the men I once called my rivals. At 92, the world shrinks to the size of a single room, and the soundtrack of your life becomes the creak of your own bones and the whisper of memories you can no longer share. My back is a constant dull ache, and my eyes can barely make out the face in the mirror, but my mind has never been so brutally clear. It's the universe's cruelest trick. It finally gives you the map, the key to it all. Right when you've reached a door you can no longer open. I am sitting here at the finish line of the great race, watching the rest of you run. And I have to tell you, from this vantage point, I can see you're all running in the wrong direction, chasing a prize that turns to dust in your hands. I'm not saying this for me. My story is written. I'm saying this for you because I can hear the clock ticking on your life, and it's a sound you've mistaken for background noise. This room is all I have left, and all I truly need. There are no trophies on the shelves, no framed awards on the wall. Those things are buried in a box in some forgotten basement, slowly becoming what they always were. Future garbage. The only object of any value here is a single worn photograph of my wife on the nightstand. Her name was Eleanor. The memory of the applause I received for being named Businessman of the Year has faded into absolute silence, but the memory of her sad, disappointed eyes when I called to tell her I had to miss her birthday dinner to close another deal, that one is right here, sitting with me in this chair every single day. It's as vivid and painful as the day it happened. That is the ghost that never leaves. I'm not here to ask for your pity for an old man's regrets. I am here to offer you a warning, one that was purchased with the only currency that matters, a lifetime. Before this room there was an empire. My life wasn't measured in quiet breaths, but in quarterly earnings reports and the relentless forward march of my own ambition. My mornings began long before the sun, not with a gentle awakening, but with the sharp, bitter taste of black coffee, of fuel for the day's conquests. I remember the solid, confident sound my leather shoes made on the marble floors of the office lobby, the feeling of being a general heading into battle. My world was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking a city I felt I owned. The phone was a permanent extension of my hand, a direct line to the future I was meticulously building, one ruthless deal at a time. My wife, Eleanor, her scent of lavender and the soft melody of her voice became part of the background music to my ascent. She was a beautiful, constant presence I took for granted, like the sturdy foundation of a skyscraper you never think about until the earthquake finally hits. My emotional state was one of perpetual motion, a hunter who believed later was a vast, open field where I would one day rest. It felt infinite, guaranteed. My best friend David was the only other person who truly understood that insatiable hunger. We were two sides of the same coin, cut from the same cloth of relentless drive, constantly pushing each other to build bigger, climb higher, and acquire more. We'd sit in a smoky bar late at night, the rich scent of his Cuban cigars filling the air, and we'd sketch our grand futures on cocktail napkins as if they were binding contracts with fate. He had it all meticulously planned, the house by the sea, the sailboat he'd named the Escape, the exact age he would finally retire and begin to truly live. He spoke of one day as if it were a real destination, a place on a map for which he had already purchased a non-refundable ticket. We were both architects of brilliant tomorrows, so completely absorbed in drawing the blueprints that we never noticed we weren't actually living in the house of today. We called it discipline, we called it sacrifice. But looking back now, I see it for what it was. We were just cowards, too afraid to face the simple, unglamorous, beautiful life that was happening right in front of us. The year was 1968. The air in the city felt electric, charged with the promise of endless growth, and no one believed in that promise more than David. The last time I saw him alive was on a Tuesday night. We were in our usual booth at a dark wood-paneled steakhouse, the air thick with the sweet, earthy scent of his Cuban cigar. He pulled out his wallet, not to pay the bill, but to show me a folded piece of paper, a timeline. It was his entire life, mapped out with an engineer's precision, the exact date he would pay off his mortgage, the month he would buy the sailboat, the day, 23 years in the future, he would finally retire and start living. He tapped the paper with a confident finger, a general pointing to a guaranteed victory on a map. "Just a few more years of the grind," he said, a familiar mantra between us. "Then we'll finally have earned our freedom." We were both living in the future, convinced the present was just a toll we had to pay to get there. The call came 2 days later, on a Thursday morning. I was in the middle of a hostile negotiation, a moment where I felt most alive, most powerful. My secretary interrupted, her voice uncharacteristically small. It was David's wife. I remember the stark contrast between the adrenaline of the boardroom and the sudden cold silence that fell over me as I listened to her words. There was no dramatic story, no heroic struggle. He had been getting ready for work, tying his shoes, when a massive coronary event simply turned the lights off. 42 years old. He didn't die climbing a mountain or closing the deal of a lifetime. He died on a perfectly ordinary morning, with his meticulously planned future still neatly folded in his wallet. The architect of a brilliant tomorrow had run out of today's. The shock wasn't emotional at first, it was logical. It was like watching a master chess player, one move away from checkmate, get struck by lightning. It simply didn't compute. A week later, I helped his widow, Sarah, clear out his office. It felt like trespassing in a museum dedicated to a life that was never lived. On his desk, a large desk calendar was open to the current month. Every single day for the next 5 years was filled with notes, goals, and financial targets. Tucked into a drawer were travel brochures for Greece, for a trip he planned to take on his 50th birthday. There was a savings account ledger labeled the Escape Fund for the sailboat he talked about incessantly. Every piece of paper was a testament to his discipline, his patience, his unwavering faith in the concept of later. I stood there, surrounded by the blueprints for a beautiful life, and I was overcome by a suffocating sense of waste. He had built a magnificent ship, polished its brass, and charted its course to a paradise island, but he died in the shipyard, never once having felt the ocean spray on his face. At his funeral, I listened to people talk about his potential, his brilliant future, his tireless work ethic. They praised the life he was going to have. And in that moment, a cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. The tragedy of my friend David was not his sudden death. The tragedy was that he had never truly lived. He spent 42 years in the waiting room of life, diligently preparing for a grand departure that was never guaranteed. He was the smartest man I knew, and he had made the most foolish trade in human history. He exchanged the tangible, certain currency of his present moments for a promissory note from a future that declared bankruptcy without any warning. That day, a seed of doubt was planted in the foundation of my own ambition. It was a small crack, barely visible, but I knew, even then, that it would one day bring the entire structure of my life crashing down. You would think that seeing my friend's meticulously planned future get canceled by a random Tuesday morning would have been a wake-up call loud enough to shatter every window in my life. It was for a moment. At his funeral, the truth felt as cold and hard as the polished wood of his coffin. But the clarity of a graveyard is a fragile thing. Back in the city, the noise of ambition is deafening, and it quickly drowned out that quiet, terrifying whisper of mortality. Instead of slowing down, I did the opposite. I sped up. I worked harder, longer, with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. I think I believed that if I could just move fast enough, I could outrun the ghost of his unlived life. I treated his death not as a warning, but as a statistical anomaly, a tragic one-off that couldn't possibly apply to me. I was different. I was smarter. I was building something permanent. It was the most arrogant, most foolish lie I ever told myself, and it would cost me everything that mattered. So I started collecting things, not just money, but symbols. I bought the big house with the sprawling lawn, a place so large that the sound of my children's laughter would get lost in the hallways before it ever reached my study. I bought the German car, a masterpiece of engineering that I drove almost exclusively between the silent garage at home and the silent garage at the office. These were supposed to be the fruits of my labor, the tangible evidence of my success. But they were just expensive insulation. Every trophy I brought home was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and my family. I'd park the car, walk into the quiet house, and feel a hollowness that no amount of success could fill. My wife, Eleanor, would look at me with an expression I couldn't decipher then, but which I understand perfectly now. It was the quiet grief for a husband who was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away, lost in the blueprints of a future she was beginning to fear would never include her. The most insidious lie I told myself was that I was doing it all for them. I called it sacrifice. I would miss school plays, anniversaries, and quiet Sunday mornings, and I would frame it as a noble act. I was the man providing, the warrior in the marketplace, securing a future so perfect that it would retroactively justify all the pain of the present. But from here, at the end of it all, I can see that narrative for the self-serving fiction it was. It wasn't sacrifice, it was selfishness dressed up in the language of responsibility. I wasn't building a future for my family, I was building a monument to my own ego. I was so obsessed with being the man who had everything that I forgot to be the man who was there for anything. I was trading irreplaceable moments, the smell of my daughter's hair after her bath, the simple comfort of holding my wife's hand while watching a movie, for things that would eventually end up in a stranger's trash heap. It was the worst trade in human history. The biggest victory of my life happened on a brightly lit stage in a hotel ballroom that smelled of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. I was named Businessman of the Year. I remember the weight of the trophy in my hands. It was heavy, cold, solid, like a piece of a fallen star. The applause was a physical force, a wave of validation that washed over me, and for a moment I felt like a god. I had bent the world to my will, outmaneuvered my rivals, and built an empire from nothing but sheer, relentless force of ambition. This, I told myself, was the justification for every missed dinner, every forgotten birthday, every bedtime story I never read. This single, shining moment was supposed to be the proof that all the sacrifices were worth it. I stood there, bathed in the warm glow of success, feeling absolutely invincible, completely unaware that I was standing at the peak of the loneliest mountain in the world. The feeling of divinity lasted for about 20 minutes. It evaporated somewhere on the highway, in the hermetically sealed silence of my German sedan. The trophy sat on the passenger seat beside me, its polished surface reflecting the passing streetlights, a silent, inanimate passenger. The roar of the crowd was gone, replaced by the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement. The city, which had felt like my kingdom just an hour before, now seemed like a collection of 1,000,000 separate, lonely lights. I was driving home with the grand prize, the ultimate symbol of my success, and a chasm of emptiness began to open up inside me. The adrenaline of the victory was wearing off, and in its place, a cold, unfamiliar feeling was creeping in. It was the chilling premonition that I had just won a game that nobody else in my life was even playing. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. Not just dark, but silent, with a kind of finality that felt heavy in the air. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous foyer. I walked through the quiet rooms, still clutching the trophy like a shield. In the kitchen, a single small lamp was on, and on the counter was a note from Eleanor. It was written in her perfect, elegant script. "Congratulations," it said. "We are so proud of you. The kids and I have gone to bed. See you in the morning." There was no anger in it, no resentment. Just a calm, polite distance that was 1,000 times more devastating than any fight would have been. They hadn't waited up. My greatest triumph was a private, solitary event. I had arrived at the finish line, only to find that my family had already gone home. That was the moment the entire artifice of my life collapsed. I stood there in the silent kitchen, a middle-aged man holding a piece of engraved glass, and I finally understood the true nature of the trade I had made. The applause from a room full of strangers was a fleeting echo, but the silence in my own home was a permanent, deafening roar. I had traded the warmth of my wife's hand for the cold weight of a trophy. I had exchanged the sound of my children's laughter for the sound of my own name being announced on a stage. It was a fool's bargain. I had spent my entire life climbing a ladder, only to realize at the very top that it had been leaning against the wrong wall. That night I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a ghost in my own house, haunting the life I had been too busy to live. That night in the kitchen, something in me didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces. But it was a clean break, the kind that finally lets the light in. For decades, I had been running from a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy, desperately trying to fill a void inside me with promotions, profits, and the hollow applause of strangers. Standing there in the dark, clutching that useless piece of engraved glass, I finally stopped running. I accepted the verdict. I was a brilliant businessman and a failed husband and father. There was no negotiating that truth, no deal to be made to change it. The transformation that followed wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was a slow, agonizing thaw. I started leaving the office at 5. I sat down for dinners where I felt like a stranger, unsure how to even start a conversation. It was clumsy, awkward, and decades too late. I was a foreigner in my own home, trying to learn a language I should have been fluent in. But I was finally, for the first time, present. I had accepted that the past was a closed book, and all I had left was the chance to write a better final chapter. After Eleanor passed, the big house became an echo chamber of my failures. Every empty room screamed with the memories of moments I had missed, of laughter I had only heard from a distance. So I sold it. I sold the expensive cars. I gave away the tailored suits. It wasn't an act of piety or a sudden conversion to minimalism. It was an act of emotional survival. I had to dismantle the monument I had built to a false god, brick by painful brick. I learned that the things you own end up owning you. They are heavy anchors that hold you in a harbor of perpetual anxiety, preventing you from ever sailing into the deep, unpredictable waters of a real life. I traded a mansion for this small room, and it was the most profitable deal I ever made. Because in this room, there is nothing to distract me from the only two assets that have any real value: the brutal truth of my memories and the remaining beats of my own heart. I discovered that a man's true wealth is not measured by what he can buy, but by what he possesses that he would never, ever sell for any price. This is why I am telling you this. It is not for your sympathy. Pity is a useless currency to a man at the finish line. I am telling you this because my regret has been forged into a key, and I am trying to hand it to you so you can unlock your own cage before the door rusts shut forever. All the deafening noise of my life, the meetings, the ambitions, the quarterly reports, has faded into an absolute, profound silence. The only thing that remains is the crystal-clear sound of these few, simple truths. This story is the only inheritance I have left to give. It's not a cautionary tale meant to scare you. It's a map. A map that was drawn on the back of a life spent walking in precisely the wrong direction. My journey is over. The roads I took have crumbled into dust behind me. But you are standing at a crossroads right now, this very second, with the sun still warm on your face, and you have a choice to make about which direction you will walk. I have been to more funerals than I can count, and I can tell you one thing with absolute certainty. I have never once seen a moving truck following a hearse. You spend your one precious life accumulating things, polishing trophies, and building bigger houses, only for your children to one day hire a stranger to throw it all in a dumpster. The things you own are just future garbage. The only assets that will follow you to the end are the moments you lived, the love you gave, and the integrity you kept. My balance sheet is final. I traded 1,000 sunsets with my wife for a few extra numbers in a bank account. I swapped the sound of my daughter's laughter for the hollow echo of applause from people whose names I can no longer remember. I am leaving this story as my only true inheritance, the final ledger of a life that was rich in currency but bankrupt in joy. It is a map drawn in the ink of my deepest regrets. So what do you do now? You stop waiting. You stop treating your life like a dress rehearsal for some grand future performance that is never guaranteed. Go home and be present. Look into the eyes of the people you love and see them, truly see them, without the filter of your ambition or your phone screen. Understand that your position at work will be posted online before your obituary is published. Your company will not mourn you. It will replace you. Your family will not replace you. They will be shattered. The clock is not just ticking. It is a sound you have mistaken for background noise, when it is, in fact, the sound of your life draining away. My story is over. Yours is being written this very second in the choices you make between now and your next breath. So please don't just listen to an old man's ramblings. Live. Live now.